If the Eagles want any chance to get back to competing for a Super Bowl, they have to walk away first with an NFC East title. Why it's so important to win the division and have home field advantage in the playoffs. All that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in, everyone, to yet another edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you to all the everydayers for joining us here at LOE, your only daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, bringing you over 1,300 episodes across 7 seasons, and we aren't going anywhere anytime soon. If you don't know me, I'm your host, Gino Camilleri, scouting director here at LOE, and today we are talking about why winning the NFC East is so important. Why the Eagles, if they want to achieve another chance to fight for a Lombardi trophy, they first have to go and fight and win their division. But before we talk about that, today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel, make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. And to get started on today's show, let's go back to 2023. I said something on a NFC East crossover episode with all the hosts. It was me, the 3 other hosts from the NFC East, and 3 of us agreed that the Philadelphia Eagles were going to be unanimous winners of the division. The only one that didn't agree was Landon McCool, host of Locked On Cowboys. He thought we were all crazy. He thought Cowboys were really going to step up this year, or being last year. Well, looked like the Eagles were runaway champs of the division until they crapped down their leg. And the Dallas Cowboys, they made me eat a lot of crow. They made me, David Harrison, Patricia Traina, all eat a lot of crow. We all thought the Eagles were going to walk away, win the division, be the first back-to-back division champions in the NFC East in over 2 decades. But it was not to be. And what happened when the Eagles went on that decline and failed to win the division? Well, for one, being one of the division champs, it at least give you an opportunity to play at home. Playing in Lincoln Financial Field versus going on the road for the Philadelphia Eagles, look at the splits. Since the turn of the century, the Eagles playing at home, they are much more successful in the playoffs than they are when they have to go on the road. Heck, if you take a step back to 2017, since then, the only 2 times that they've seen a high level of success in the playoffs came when they won the division. And when they failed to do that, well, the results would follow. Let's start with the Super Bowl year in 2017. They would go on this crazy run. They would win the division far and away. And what would they do? They would get 2 playoff games at Lincoln Financial Field where they would beat the Atlanta Falcons, and then they would beat the Minnesota Vikings, and then they won the Super Bowl. What happens the next year? They managed to find their way in to the playoffs. It was an up and down year. Carson Wentz is on injured reserve. He's off injured reserve, back on injured reserve. Nick Foles comes in, runs the table. They get a wild card spot, but it was the only wild card win that you have seen in this stretch. The last time they won a wild card game, being a wild card team, you got to go all the way back to 2008 until the year 2018. They would win that road game against the Bears, but then they would lose to New Orleans on the road. 2019, they would end up getting the ability to play a home playoff game. They somehow found a way to get into the playoffs and win that division. But they played in the wild card round, and they lost at home. Next year, they played on the road at Tampa in the wild card round, and they lost on the road in the wild card round. Let's take a step back to last year in 2023. The exact same thing would happen. Well, what happened in 2022? When you won the division, you got to a Super Bowl because you were able to play games at home. The thing about winning the division is that it used to be great because you would at least have a 50% chance to get a bye in the first round. Well, that's now been reduced to 25% chance, seeing that only one team is going to have all of those, or just one bye, being the only team out of all of them to get one round off. Why is that so important? Look at last year. If you could have at least won that division, would you have stood a chance playing at Lincoln Financial Field? Probably a better chance than you did going on the road to Tampa Bay. The proof is in the pudding. Winning the division is the only way forward. 2019, it's an anomaly. They somehow run the table. They're able to squeak out a way to get into the playoffs. Carson Wentz takes a hit on the head. The season is dead before we know it. But in 2017, when they had a bye, and in 2022, when they had a bye, they were able to get to the Super Bowl. Having that additional week to prepare, having that additional week to rest, it's huge. And now more than ever, when only one team in the conference, two teams in the league get a bye, I would say that the Eagles have to start by winning this division. Because if last year happens and you falter, well, not only do you shoot yourself in the foot after losing that San Fran game, that was the first shot into your left foot, throwing away the 1 seed. Well, then when you start to lose games against the Arizona Cardinals and the New York Giants in the back half of the season when you had no business losing those games, well, you threw away the division. Being a wild card team is not a successful route forward for the Philadelphia Eagles. Heck, it's not a successful route forward for most teams in the NFL. Most teams in today's day and age, those are teams that are winning their division. They're hosting multiple playoff games at home. But above anything else, they get that bye. But to get that bye, you got to win your division. Because if last year happens, we know where this thing is going to go. So let's take a step back and look at how the Eagles have done against the division since Jalen Hurts has came to the helm. All that and more as we continue on this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. As we roll along, this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And if you've been betting with me, you've probably been losing. Yesterday, I told you to go with the Nuggets. They get their doors blown off of them. But tonight, I got to ride with my Avalanche once again over at FanDuel. They're currently minus 115, the favorites over the Stars tonight in a must-win game. And right now, if you're a new customer and you want to get in on the action, all you have to do is put in a $5 bill. And if that $5 bet wins, you're going to get $150 back in bonus bets to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book, the official sports book of the entire Locked On Podcast Network, and the only place we're making wagers here at the Locked On Eagles podcast. Welcome on back, everyone, to this 5th and final episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast this week. Thank you to our everydayers for tuning in each and every day. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to the show. And if you love Locked On Sports and all of the shows that they have to offer, and you are sick of watching Fox Sports and ESPN on your TV all day because you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, well, Us here at the Locked On Podcast Network, we got something for you. Switch to the Locked On Sports today. It is a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for your everyday needs to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And today we are continuing on the discussion with the importance of winning the NFC East. For one, winning the NFC East would keep the Dallas Cowboys from being the first back-to-back champions to go and do it. Do I think Dallas is going to be that second team? I'm going to bite my tongue on that one this year. We'll let fate decide. I think Washington's going to give them a good run for their money. I don't think the Giants are going to be a big threat. But I legitimately think Washington has added talent and changed at the quarterback position in a positive direction that is going to push them and push the Eagles in this division a little bit. So let's take a look at the last couple of years since Jalen Hurts has came to the helm in Philadelphia. One thing that I found interesting is Jalen Hurts has gone no less than 500 against the division at any given time. In 2021, he was 2-0 against Washington, 1-1 against the Giants, unfortunately 0-2 against the Cowboys. But hey, he was 3-3 in his first year as a starter in the division. Not too shabby. Go to 2022. 0-2 against Dallas. One of those games was the Gardner Minshew game. We know that. 3-0 against the Giants. 1-1 against Washington. 5-2 in the division. That's where this team has to be. In last year, they went 4-2 in the division and somehow lost the division. 2-0 against Washington, 1-1 against the Giants, 1-1 against Dallas. If Jalen Hurts can go on these stretches where he's winning 5 out of 6 games in the division, or even 4 like he did last year, and they don't have that collapse like they had last year, you are going to win this division. It's as simple as that. And why are these wins so much more important than other wins? To rank them, it goes divisional, conference, out of conference. Reason being, it's like getting 2 wins when you beat these teams. In 2021, when you go 0-2 against the Cowboys, it's like going 0-4, essentially, because they get 2 wins, you get 2 losses. It's a 4-game swing. Look at the Super Bowl year in 2017. The only loss you take in the division is against the Cowboys in a meaningless Week 17 game where you sat all your starters. If you can get back to that, and we know that the NFC East it's going to be a competitive division this year. Is it going to be the most competitive division in the NFC? I would say no. I think the NFC North and the NFC West got some really good teams out there that are going to give the NFC East a run for their money. But is it the worst division in football? By no means at all. Dallas is still going to give you trouble. Washington is a younger team now, even though they added a lot of older talent. It's kind of funny. They had a rookie quarterback, but they're signing guys like Zach Ertz. But they obviously want to compete with that new ownership group there. The Giants, they should be better defensively. Offensively, I don't know what Daniel Jones is going to give you. But Hurts has to, 1, continue what he's doing in these games against divisional opponents. And I'm sure there was one of those games that he might have been injured in there as well. But all in all, if the Eagles as a unit can win 67% of their divisional games in any given year, they're going to have a chance to win the division. But what else has to happen? 1, you got to go and beat those teams in the AFC. All those teams in the AFC North are common opponents that you are going to have with those teams in the NFC East. All the teams that you're playing in the NFC South, you have to beat those teams as well because those are common opponents as well with those teams. But where do the Eagles have a little bit of an advantage on the schedule over a team like the Cowboys? To wrap up this show, we're going to talk about the differences between the 4 NFC East teams and the 3 differing opponents that they will see on their schedules as we finish up this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Come on back. As we continue to roll along, this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride or die every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car your MVP. Bring home huge wins today. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. All right, everyone. Gino Camilleri, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, finishing up this Friday edition of the show. Lou is currently down in Philadelphia at the Eagles Autism Ride. Jeffrey Lurie, absolute GOAT status. I'm so happy for one that my co-host goes and puts his time and effort to donate to that. So many Philadelphians participate in the event. So many former Eagles athletes, so many current Eagles go to this event. Jeffrey Lurie, what he does with that Eagles Autism Ride is huge. Shout out my co-host, Lou DiBiase. I'm not a bike rider. I'm not great with cardio. I'm glad he's participating on all of our behalf. So thank you to Lou and everybody participating in that. But we are talking about the Philadelphia Eagles schedule, getting back to this episode and where things differ for the 4 NFC East teams. So as you know, as I said in the prior segment, they have multiple common opponents in the AFC North, the NFC South, but with 17 games, there are 3 games that differ. Dallas, boy, do they have a tough go with it. They have to play the first place team in the NFC North, the NFC West, and the AFC South. So that gets them the Lions, 49ers, and Texans. As opposed to the Eagles, who play the Packers, Rams, and Jaguars. The Giants will see the Vikings, Seahawks, and Colts. And Washington will see the Bears, Cardinals, and Titans. So looking at the 2 teams at the top right now, Dallas and Philadelphia, the 2 teams that finished 1 and 2. Was it a blessing in disguise that the Philadelphia Eagles kind of slipped up at the last part of that season when they for sure were winning nothing? It might have been. I'm thanking my lucky stars right now that the Philadelphia Eagles are playing the Green Bay Packers over the Detroit Lions. Green Bay, it's a good ascending team, but they still have to show who they are. 49ers over the Rams. Eagles got their butt kicked by the 49ers last year. Those games are always difficult. But the Rams, they've had a better time going against. And then the Texans or the Jaguars. The Texans might be the biggest sleeping giant in the entire league right now. And the Jaguars' Doug Peterson element is always going to make it a coin toss. But having these 3 opponents be different than those of Dallas could give them an upper hand. Because let's say Dallas loses all 3 of those games. And the Philadelphia Eagles are able to pick up at least 1 win in this stretch, which I believe they should be able to, if not 2. That's going to only push them a step closer. A step closer to getting the bye. A step closer to cementing the division. A step closer to being the 1 seed. Because that's what it boils down to. The Packers, they could be competing for the NFC North. I don't think the Rams are going to be competing for the NFC West, but realistically, they can be competing for a wildcard spot. Jacksonville, that might be a team that could be competing for the number 1 seed in their own conference. But those teams that Dallas are going against, you're talking about the past representative of the NFC in the Super Bowl, the team that almost beat them in that championship game to potentially get to that Super Bowl in the Lions. And then the Texans, as I said, who are the biggest sleeping giant in the whole league. Could be a little bit of a blessing in disguise. Sucked the way they went out. But if you see the Eagles pick up 2 wins in this stretch, and Dallas only gets 1 out of these 3, that could be the push over the hump to get them to that 1 seed. Because as I said on the intro, 2017, 2022, what do? They win the division, they get the 1 seed, they host multiple home playoff games, and they end up competing for a Lombardi trophy. They were luckier in one rather than the other, but it starts with winning the division. You have to get back to the basics. And not just beating your division, competing against this division where you are showing where you stand. And what I mean by that is not letting Sam Howell and Washington do what they did to you last year by putting up 30 plus. You can't let Jaden Daniels do that to you this year. You can't let Daniel Jones and that New York Giants team, which no longer has their best player on offense, which you have their best player on offense, you can't get into these games where they're even closer. You even look like garbage like you did in week 18 last year. And with Dallas, I think it's the Eagles' time to just cement themselves as the winners of this division, as the guys that are going to be the ones that got to be competed with the next 3 to 5 years. The guys that are going to sit at the head of the table, like they did with the Donovan years. Let's be real about Dallas for a second. Jerry Jones said they're going all in. Do the moves look like they're going all in? Signing back Ezekiel Elliott, Royce Freeman. They still haven't paid Dak Prescott or CeeDee Lamb. It's the Eagles' division to lose again. It's the Eagles' division to lose. I don't care who comes in 2nd through 4th. I care that the Eagles handle their business. They win at least 66%, meaning 4 out of 6 games in the division. And they somehow handle that second place schedule that they were lucky enough to work themselves into and not have to go and play the Lions, 49ers, and Texans. Well, that'll do it for me today. Your host, Gino Camilleri, as always, bringing you this episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And if you didn't know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app, or wherever you found us, potentially on YouTube, potentially listening along on one of the many great streaming platforms. But if you have not subscribed, please do that right now. Subscribe to keep the pod alive so we can continue to get to 1,500 episodes. We want to keep hosting this thing until, 20 seasons. We aren't going anywhere here at the Locked On Eagles podcast. But that'll do it for me today. Gino Camilleri, your host. As always, good luck to Lou and everyone at the Eagles Autism Ride down in Philly. Shout out to the GOAT owner, Jeffrey Lurie. Shout out to all the everydayers. You are the GOATs, the people that keep this ship running. But that'll do it for me today. Gino Camilleri signing off. As always, and like I always say, go Birds and fly Eagles fly.